It begins with a photograph, a faded Polaroid found in the attic of a house no one was supposed to enter. Dust clings to the frame, but through it you can still see the two faces, an old man and a young girl, standing in front of a crumbling porch. They're not smiling, not exactly. Their mouths are stretched just enough to pass as human, but their eyes, those eyes seem to share something unspoken, something only they know. The photograph was dated 1978. The Plaisard, West Virginia, a town so small that even the state map forgot to name it. But what happened in that house between that man and that girl is not forgotten, not by the land, not by the bloodline. You see, when you drive down Route 3 and take the turn toward the hollow, the trees seem to bend inward, as if trying to hide what's left of that place. The road narrows, the sunlight fades, and soon all you can hear is the river below, black and slow. Locals don't talk about the house at the end of the road, not anymore. Some say it's cursed, others say it's still occupied, but the truth is far worse. The man in that photo was named Elias Whitlow. To outsiders, he was just another forgotten Appalachian farmer, a man who lived off the land and kept to himself. But to the few who knew him, Elias was the patriarch of a family line that had been rotting from the inside for nearly a century. The Whitlows were known in the county for their strange habits. They rarely came to town, and when they did, they moved in clusters, silent, staring, almost identical, pale skin, glassy eyes, hair the color of dead straw. There were whispers, of course, the kind that live and die in small towns, that the Whitlows didn't marry outsiders, that they didn't need to. Generations of Whitlows had lived and died in the same valley, marrying cousins, nieces, even daughters. It began long before Elias was born, but by the time he came into the world, the family tree had stopped branching altogether. What was left wasn't a tree, it was a knot, tight, gnarled, and suffocating. Elias was said to be different, though, smarter, more aware of what his family had become, and for a time people thought he might be the one to break the curse. He worked odd jobs in town, fixed engines, sold firewood. People tolerated him until one day he disappeared. For nearly 15 years, no one saw Elias, not until he returned with a child, a little girl named Clara. No one knew where she'd come from. He said she was his granddaughter, but there was no record of any son or daughter. No birth certificate, no mother, no trace, just the old man and the girl living in that house on the hill, surrounded by the ghosts of their own making. Neighbors, if you could call them that, claimed they saw strange things in those years. The two of them walking the property lines at night, barefoot, lantern in hand, the sound of laughter echoing through the woods long after midnight, and sometimes the girl would wander into town, quiet and dirty, her eyes always down. She never spoke, only stared at the faces of strangers like she was trying to memorize them. Elias would come for her soon after, his voice low and stern, leading her back down the road like a shepherd with his last remaining sheep. And then they'd vanish again. It wasn't until 1996 that someone finally entered the Whitlow house. A group of teenagers dared each other to break in after hearing the stories. What they found inside still makes the sheriff's deputy who took the report tremble when he talks about it. The house was filled with photographs, hundreds of them, lining the walls, scattered across the floors, tucked into jars, nailed to doors. All of the same two people, the old man and the girl, standing in the same places, wearing the same expressions year after year. Only the dates changed. The girl never seemed to age, or if she did, the man grew younger beside her. And then there were the drawings, pinned up like trophies, childish sketches of two figures holding hands beneath a bleeding sun. The names written underneath, Grandpappy and me. When the police were finally called, the house was empty. No Elias, no Clara, only the walls watching back. But something was found in the cellar, a set of bones, small and delicate, laid out in a wooden cradle. They were too small to be an adult's, too large to be an infant's. Forensics couldn't determine much. The remains were too old, too degraded. But what they could tell was this: the DNA matched both Elias and the child who'd been seen in town. That was when the truth began to surface. Elias Whitlow hadn't found a granddaughter. He had made one. The bloodline had folded back in on itself one final time, until the end and the beginning were the same. What he called family was something else entirely, something unnatural, and the worst part, no one ever found their bodies. There were sightings, of course, whispers of a man and a young girl walking the back roads at dusk, hand in hand. But every time someone tried to follow, they vanished into the trees, leaving nothing behind but footprints. One large, one small, side by side, leading deeper into the hills until they simply stopped. And that's where the story should have ended. But it didn't, because in 2012, a woman came forward claiming to be Clara Whitlow. She'd been found in a shelter 2 states away, under a false name. Her hair had turned white, though she couldn't have been more than 35. When asked about her grandfather, she said something that silenced the room. "He's still with me," she whispered. "He said he'd never let me go." She refused to speak after that. Not to the police, not to reporters, not even to the doctors who tried to help her. She died 6 months later in her sleep, her body found curled in the fetal position, clutching a photograph. It was the same one from the attic, the old man, the girl, and the words written on the back in trembling ink: "We'll never be apart." They buried her in an unmarked grave, somewhere near the hollow where it all began. But sometimes, late at night, people driving that same road claim they see them. 2 silhouettes standing by the roadside, holding hands. A man and a girl, neither of them looking quite right, and if you slow down to look closer, you'll see their eyes, the same eyes from that photograph, still watching, still waiting. Still Whitlow. There's a theory among the old families of Appalachia that some bloodlines don't die, they just go underground, that the land itself remembers them, feeds them, keeps them breathing long after the rest of the world has moved on. The Whitlows were one of those families. You can trace their roots back to the early 1800s, when the first settlers carved out homesteads deep in the coal valleys of southern West Virginia. They were miners, trappers, farmers. People who lived off whatever the earth would give them. But as the generations passed, the world around them changed. The railroads came, then the coal companies, then the wars. The Whitlows didn't change with it. They stayed behind, alone in those hills, marrying within their own blood. Some say it started as survival, too far from town, too poor, too proud to seek outsiders. But others believe it was a choice, a vow, made by the first Whitlow patriarch, a man named Jonah, who believed the family's blood carried something sacred, something pure. He was wrong. What Jonah called purity was decay. Each generation became smaller, paler, quieter. The Whitlows stopped being part of the town and started being part of the woods. By the 1930s, locals avoided their property altogether. They said the family could see in the dark, that they could smell fear, that sometimes at night you'd hear them singing not hymns, not words, just low animal sounds that rose and fell with the wind. That's where Elias came from, born to a mother who could barely speak and a father who'd forgotten how to be human. He was the only one of 6 siblings to survive past childhood. People said he was born different, intelligent, cunning, aware, but awareness doesn't always lead to salvation. Sometimes it only deepens the sickness. When Elias grew older, he left the valley, worked in Charleston, even joined the military for a short time. It was there, people think, that he first understood what his family truly was: not a lineage, but a warning. And when he returned, years later, it wasn't to save them, it was to preserve them. That's when he built the house on Whitlow Hill. Not the old cabin that had burned down decades earlier, but something new. A fortress, hidden from view, with boarded windows and a cellar that ran deep into the bedrock. Locals called it the burrow. Inside that house, Elias began what he called the renewal. No one knows how he found the child. Some think she was taken. Others whisper she was born not from a stranger, but from something that should never have been. The truth was lost when Elias stopped speaking to anyone from town, but there were letters. Decades later, a collector found a bundle of them inside a rusted metal box during an estate sale. They were never meant to be read. The ink was fading, the paper soft as skin. Most were written in Elias's hand, meticulous, deliberate, full of scripture and desperation. One of them read, "The blood remembers, it calls for itself. To mix is to forget. She is of me, as I am of her. This is how the line will be made whole again." Another, "She learns quickly. She doesn't question. She knows what the others never did, that we are the last true Whitlows. When the time comes, she'll understand the gift." There was one written in a smaller hand, almost childlike, addressed to Grandpappy. "I saw Mama today in the mirror. You said she lives in me now. I told her I'd be good. I promise I'll keep the blood." That letter was dated 1981. After that, there were no more. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have run? Or would you have stayed to keep the secret alive? Because here's the thing about secrets like the Whitlows. They don't just die when the people do. They linger in the soil, in the air, in the faces of those who don't even know they're connected. In 2008, a genealogist studying genetic disorders in rural Appalachia stumbled on a cluster of cases all within a 30-mile radius of where the Whitlow house once stood. Children born with the same rare mutation, translucent skin, low speech, and something else. Something harder to explain. Each of them claimed to hear voices in the woods. A man calling a name that wasn't theirs. Clara. The genealogist traced the records back, trying to find a link. She never found one on paper. But in her private notes, discovered after she quit the project, she wrote this: "I've seen the same eyes, over and over again." She left Appalachia soon after and never returned. The locals still talk about the Whitlow Hollow. They say no bird sings there, no animal crosses the property line. Some swear that when the fog rolls through the valley, it moves differently, like it's hiding something inside. And then there's the girl. Reports of a woman walking the road at dusk, barefoot, her hair white as bone. She doesn't hitchhike, doesn't wave, she just walks slowly. Some drivers say she turns her head as they pass, and for a split second, her eyes glow in the rear. You mirror pale and colorless, reflecting the headlights like an animal's. One man claimed she followed him. He said he drove faster, but no matter how far he went, she stayed in sight, just behind the tree line. When he finally reached the highway, he looked in his mirror one last time. She was sitting in the back seat. He never drove that road again. Some call it superstition, others inherited madness. But what if it's neither? What if Elias's renewal worked not in the way he intended, but in a darker, older way? What if the blood really does remember? What if it's still calling? There's something about these old Appalachian families that terrifies historians. The isolation, the secrecy, the way stories vanish between generations. But the Whitlows aren't just a story, they're a stain that keeps showing up, decade after decade, on faces that look too familiar, in towns that claim to have forgotten, and sometimes in photographs mailed to post offices with no return address. Always the same two figures, always the same words scrawled on the back: "We'll never be apart." By the time investigators returned to what was left of the Whitlow property in 2014, the house was gone. Only the stone foundation remained, swallowed by ivy and roots, but beneath it, they found something no one expected: a hidden tunnel carved straight into the hillside. The tunnel ran deep, far deeper than a man like Elias could have dug alone. It twisted and narrowed, the air growing colder the farther they went. The walls were smooth, almost polished, as if hands had run along them for years. And then, at the end, they found a single wooden chair. On it lay a leather-bound journal. The first page read, "To whoever finds this, understand, I did not choose this. The blood chose me." The entries were dated from 1977 to 1994. The handwriting started strong, then grew frantic, trembling, uneven. They spoke of voices whispering through the walls, of the girl dreaming of places she'd never been, of something ancient inside her that Elias believed he'd awoken. In one entry, he wrote, "She hums to herself now, songs I don't know but feel I've heard before. When she sings, the house listens. Sometimes the lights flicker, sometimes the earth shakes. It's the blood remembering its shape." Another, months later, "I thought I was preserving us, but she's not mine anymore. She's becoming something else." And finally, a single line near the end, written in a trembling scrawl that tore the paper. She said, "I'm the beginning and the end." She said, "It's my turn to sleep now." After that, nothing. Forensic teams tested what they could: the dirt, the fibers, the faint traces of blood. All they could confirm was that the samples contained severe genetic degradation, not just from decay, but from repetition. The same DNA copied over itself too many times until it began to collapse, like a family line eating its own reflection. The case was closed without conclusion. The files were sealed, and yet those who entered that tunnel said they never felt alone down there. One deputy swore he heard breathing, soft, steady, just behind his shoulder. When he turned, there was nothing but darkness. Still, he left the force the next day. He said he couldn't get the sound out of his head. Said it wasn't just one person breathing, it was two, in unison. For years after, people kept finding things in the woods near the old Whitlow land. Tiny handprints in the mud, strands of white hair caught on branches. Once, a cracked Polaroid half, buried in the leaves, too damaged to see clearly, but you could still make out two shapes standing side by side. The sheriff burned it before anyone else could see. But the thing about burning photographs is this: fire doesn't destroy memory. It just makes room for it to come back, and it did. In 2018, a family moved into a house less than a mile from the hollow. They didn't know the history. How could they? The realtor said nothing. The records were gone. But soon after, strange things began to happen. Their daughter, 9 years old, started talking to someone who wasn't there. At first, they thought it was harmless, an imaginary friend. But then she began referring to him by name. "Illy." She said he was kind, that he told her stories about a girl named Clara who lived in the woods. When her parents asked where she met him, she pointed out the window toward the tree line. "He waits there when the moon's full," she said. "He says he's looking for his family." 2 weeks later, the family moved out in the middle of the night. They left everything: furniture, dishes, even their car. The house still stands empty. Locals say if you walk past it after dark, you can hear a girl humming somewhere deep in the forest. The same melody over and over until it fades into silence. And sometimes, if the wind shifts just right, another voice joins in, lower, older, a man's voice. There are stories older than the Whitlows that speak of this kind of thing: bloodlines that close themselves off until they touch something not meant for them. Folklorists call it the inward turning. A point where family becomes faith, faith becomes obsession, and obsession becomes something that defies death. Elias didn't just destroy his bloodline, he anchored it, bound it to the land that birthed it, like roots twisting around bones. Maybe that's why the sightings never stop, why the road through the hollow stays colder than the rest of the valley. Because if you believe the stories, and maybe you shouldn't, but maybe you should, the Whitlows never left. They simply went deeper, deeper into the ground, deeper into the memory of the place, deeper into the parts of us that can't look away from what's wrong because it feels too familiar. People always ask why stories like this matter. Why dig up old ghosts when the world has enough of its own? The answer is simple: because the Whitlows were real. Maybe not in name, maybe the county records erased that. But families like them existed, and still do, tucked away in forgotten corners of America, where shame grows like moss and history refuses to die. And maybe somewhere out there, another grandfather is whispering the same promise into another child's ear. We'll never be apart. So if you ever find yourself driving through southern West Virginia and you take a wrong turn down a road that doesn't appear on your GPS, and you see a girl standing by the trees, hair pale in the headlights, eyes too wide, too still, don't stop. Don't look back, because some families aren't meant to be remembered, and some secrets were never meant to be found.